Hello, folks. Again, my name is Steve Hawkins. I serve as the director of the U.S. Cannabis Council. And coming in here, I knew I was not entering, the lion's den, and that we all know that we need to work together. The U.S. Cannabis Council has been around for about 8 months. We have brought together 40 of the largest companies in the space, several of the major advocacy organizations and trade groups. And on day one, there was an understanding that we needed to have as one of our core areas responsibility. An understanding that we need to advocate, not just talk, but advocate for responsible consumption, to make sure that cannabis is not being consumed by those under the age of 21, and to make sure that we protect our roadways. We want to be partners with all of you in making sure that all of those goals get addressed. I want to leave you all thinking about 3 numbers. The first is the number 70, because about 70% of the American people are in favor of cannabis legalization. It is inevitable at this point. The other number is 40. We see about 40% of the states now having fully legalized. It'll probably be about 50% by the end of 22. And then the number 1, and perhaps that's the most important number, because one family that suffers, one needless death, one tragedy is too much. And we need to do all we can to educate the public, to make sure that as people use cannabis, they're responsible. I'm pleased to be introducing this panel, particularly because I think as cannabis has come online, people need to be educated. But we face challenges. We face challenges that are unique because of the federal ban, right? If I wanted to do a Facebook campaign on responsible consumption, guess what happens when the word cannabis shows up in the ad? The algorithms trip and the whole campaign gets shut down. We have some very unique challenges because of the federal ban. Right now in Congress, there is a comprehensive bill that would end the federal prohibition on cannabis and open up for not only full federal regulation, but also the federal dollars, which, as I have been here today, I have heard you all speak again and again about the need. In that bill right now, and I know folks like Brandy and others in this room are studying it, there's money being allocated for grants for federal, for highway safety, particularly looking at cannabis, only for 5 of the states with the 5 worst DUI statistics. You all know that's not enough, right? So we need to be able to weigh in together on these bills. And as I've talked to Jake, I want to be able to partner with all of you all and be able to use the companies within the U.S. Cannabis Council to spread the message, to make sure that we have responsible consumption, to make sure that we are doing everything we can to protect the roadways. Thank you all for having me today.
Thanks, Steve. We appreciate your partnership. Our next session will be on countermeasures that deal with public education. And it will be led by Leslie Kimball from responsibility.org. And we have with us Jake Nelson at AAA, reprising his performance from this morning, David Ocamb with GDC Marketing, and Shelly Baldwin from the Washington Traffic Safety Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I know that for so many of us, this is not just a job, it's something we're extremely passionate about and care very deeply about. And I'm not sure that anyone has, it sounds like Darren was thanked already, but I'm going to thank Darren for all your hard work to put this together, and Brandy. And I don't know if Maureen, I'm not sure if Maureen Dahlbeck is still here, but also GHSA and AAA and Sam and Hannah and Joey and everyone at responsibility.org for all their hard work to get this going, and also all of you for, you know, again, it not just being just a job, it's something that we really love to do and something we believe in. What? Oh my God, sorry. Excuse me. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, after all of that, thank you, and I'm going to hand it over to Jake.
All right. I just want to acknowledge the mood lighting that was installed before our session. I really appreciate it. Excuse me. So, shark trait, I have to walk. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about probably one of the most famous consumer education campaigns, sort of mass ad campaigns in the history of the US. How many of you recognize this campaign?
Yeah.
What's it called?
Got milk.
Who remembers the very first commercial that aired on TV in 1994? Who shot Alexander Hamilton? Aaron Burr, with the mouthful of, what was it? Cheese and crackers? I don't know what, peanut butter on bread. So this campaign, the Got Milk campaign, it ran from 1993 through about 2004. So many years. It won all kinds of awards. It's one of the most recognized ad campaigns in history. Very sticky message. Everyone can recall it. Everyone knows what it's about. And what's the point of the campaign? To sell more milk. All right, so we get it. We've figured out the big plan here is to sell more milk and to help dairy farmers. So I want to tell you a little bit about the history of the campaign, though, and how it came to be, and let you know what the data say about whether it worked or not and what they did to make some changes. So the campaign was originally created by a San Francisco-based advertising company hired by the milk farmers and dairy processors of California only. And so they did their homework. They did some formative research, some focus group testing to try to understand from people how they felt about milk and look for emotional connections to milk. And one woman in one focus group made one comment that became the Got Milk campaign. That was the research that led to this campaign. A sample of one. And she said, the only time I think about milk is when I've run out of it. And so the facilitator of the focus group in San Francisco said, I think I'm onto something here, this notion of deprivation. And instead of trying to market milk, let's market the deprivation or the absence of it and play on that. And so while the campaign was really sticky and resonated with a lot of people in terms of their ability to recall the message and that to try to convince them that milk was important, and despite the 350 celebrities and athletes that participated in this campaign over the years that it ran, with the milk mustache part of it in particular, between the years of 1970 and 2010, milk consumption dropped every single year for 30 years. Yet this campaign ran for 20 years. And so it wasn't until 1993 that the people running this campaign and funding it year after year after year, multiple millions of dollars in paid advertising, said, all right, it's not working, but everyone loves the campaign and we have all these awards, we have to figure something out. So they went back and did the formative research that they should have done in the beginning. And instead of relying on a sample of one to come up with this whole campaign, they did better, more rigorous research to try to understand what was really motivating, and they narrowed their target audience. And so Got Milk, while that was still the tagline for the campaign, the way that they communicated, the imagery that they used in their ads all changed in 2004 based on the research that they went back and did. And what they turned it into is the Milk Your Diet campaign. Milk Your Diet, Lose Weight. And their new target audience became women between the ages of 26 and 49. And so between comparing the milk sales before and after the first complete year of this campaign ran, while Got Milk produced no effects in increased milk consumption up until that point, between 2004 and 2005, milk consumption among that target age group of women increased by over 9% in 1 year. And so it just goes to show you how no matter how popular and well-recognized a campaign is, doesn't mean that it's effective. And we all know in highway safety that we have very limited resources to spend on consumer education, especially if it's not tied to some other intervention like law enforcement, like high visibility enforcement. So if it's just a message, if it's just a consumer education campaign, you have to really do the work to make sure that you're developing a message that's compelling and that motivates change to get the outcome of interest that you want. And sometimes, depending on the line of work or the topic or problem we're trying to solve, we're looking for people to do things or to not do things, like not drive impaired. So good lesson to learn from this campaign. The other thing I would say about consumer education, if you're trying to change behavior through education, is that it's not about you. And what I mean by that is all of us in this room, we get it. We've already drank the Kool-Aid, we understand, and for people like us, we just need the statistics to motivate our behavior, right? And we can't understand sometimes how just throwing statistics at people doesn't compel them to do the right thing or to avoid a negative behavior. And so not only are people different in the world from us, but they're different from one another. And what motivates you, as somebody who isn't attending a conference on this topic, isn't going to be the same thing that motivates you. And so you really have to do your research to understand your audience, what motivates them, why they do the bad thing, what would compel them to do the right thing. And you need to figure out through some theoretical behavior change theories and frameworks, how to build your campaign and your message and different attributes of that campaign to provide you the greatest opportunity to have the impact that you want. And so you're going to hear some examples here in a moment, and I'm going to give you a few more tips here. So the Ad Council, which I assume you're all familiar with the Ad Council, they run all kinds of public service announcements, and they've partnered with NHTSA on a lot of their campaigns as well. One of the commitments they have in the work that they do is that they want to evaluate the effect of the campaigns that they help to run. And so on their website, you can pull data, not only in terms of how much money was spent on the formative research to build the campaign, but also how much was spent to run the campaign and how much was spent on the summative research or the evaluation research in the field after. And they don't always look for changes in crashes or changes in deaths and injuries. Sometimes they're looking for the metrics that they use are self-reported information, right? It's really expensive to evaluate these big campaigns, especially if they're national in focus. But if you were to pull all of these data together, you'd learn that they, on the average, well-developed, research-based consumer education campaigns that aren't paired with another countermeasure like beefed up enforcement, for example, takes about $10 million a year for a 1 percentage point change in the behavior of interest. So that's not to dissuade anyone from investing in consumer education. It's 100% absolutely necessary, but it's entirely insufficient by its own as a solution to public health and highway safety problems. All right, so I share that with you, again, not to deter us from investing in education, because I think that's really important and we need to do it. But in a world where we have so little resources to use at the state level on highway safety stuff, I think we need to think carefully about where we're using that small amount of resources. Where can we have the biggest bang for our buck? And sometimes just educating people isn't going to be enough, especially if you're not going to do the right work to develop the right messaging and campaign that will stand a chance of having an effect. Now, the truth is there's all kinds of literature, books, resources out there already that you could cobble together and figure out what are the theories of behavior change that would apply best to the intervention that I'm trying to create. How to evaluate an intervention like a consumer education campaign. You could do this work on your own without any help from AAA or anybody else. But I know what it's like in highway safety, and I know that it's rare that you're a highway safety practitioner who's responsible for only one issue. We have many jobs, we wear many hats, we're super busy, and we don't have time to spend 3 weeks in a library doing our research to figure this out. So we need something, a resource for the busy practitioner, somebody who doesn't have a lot of time to do that digging, somebody who needs to know, all right, what are the most important things I need to do to develop the best possible consumer education campaign that I can, given the people and the resources that I have available to me. And so what we did through the AAA Foundation is we partnered with the University of Chicago and the National Opinion Research Center to develop a toolkit for that very audience, this group of people. And when you guys access these slides later, the cover on the slide is hyperlinked to the report itself. It's free to everyone. It's on the AAA Foundation's website. You don't have to be a AAA member to access or use it or download it, and I encourage you to do it. I'm not going to go through the toolkit in great detail, but I'll just mention that there are 5 different phases in here that bring you through every step of developing a properly created, promising consumer education behavior change campaign. From helping you to understand what are the theories of behavior change that apply best to your campaign. Most times it's more than one. That helps you to focus your message and to use the right words and to avoid the wrong words. So we all think, because we understand this stuff, that, oh, well, we'll just say X, Y, Z because it's straightforward, it's simple, we're not using a lot of copy, that's a good thing. You know, I'll be honest, 60% of the, like, you'll probably get 60% of the way there, just doing what seems logical in terms of the messaging and everything else. But if you don't do that research to understand your audience well and what motivates them and demotivates them, and you don't take advantage of behavior change theory to understand what other attributes of campaigns that you can incorporate into your intervention or your consumer education campaign to help better compel people to do the thing you want them to do or avoid the thing you want them to avoid, you won't be as successful at the end of the day. And it's really hard to measure changes with this kind of an intervention. So you want to give yourself the best shot. Each of these phases has a checklist attached to it. And you can click on any of these things to learn more information about, all right, well, what does this mean and how do I do it? But the checklist, again, is meant to be a tool for the busy practitioner. All right, well, we've already done our focus group testing. We've already researched our target audience, and we've already developed like art collateral and sample messaging that we're ready to focus group test. So do we skip phase 1? No, you can still go back and do that work and make tweaks to your materials before you focus group test it. And this helps you to do that fairly quickly. In fact, I just did this for one of our AAA clubs on the topic of slow down, move over. They had invested a lot of money and were about to drop $80,000 on some focus group and survey research to test their ads and their messaging and hadn't done any of this work, even though we have this tool available to them. So I sat down with them and in 24 hours was able to go back, do the work, pull the theories, recommend some changes to the messaging and artwork that they already had that weren't significant, by the way, that will help them to be more successful probably in achieving a greater number of people complying with move over laws. So it's not a heavy lift, especially if you use a resource like this. So this is available to everyone to use, and I would encourage you to do it, especially at the Highway Safety Office level, to make sure that you're getting the most for the limited resources that we have to educate consumers in highway safety. So I'll stop there.
Great presentation, really enjoyed it. It really teed me up to kind of where we're gonna go with this. When I was asked to speak here today, I was tasked with calling out some big issues that the advertising and marketing agencies face when confronting the issue of impaired driving in general and specifically multi-substance impaired driving. I was also asked to keep the formal remarks really short in order to have a roundtable discussion and answer your questions. So what I'm going to do is kind of outline a few big challenges and go very top level on those challenges, with each slide being a new challenge, and kind of just bounce around. And so after a conference like this, we go to these conferences, right? Have any of you guys read the book Strength Finders? In Strength Finders, there's a personality type called an activator. And I think a lot of us are activators. We want to act, we want to do something, we want to have a press conference, we want to go to an event, we want to build a partnership, we want to even cut a new TV spot because we've got a problem and by golly, we need to solve it, right? That's not a campaign. That is not a campaign. A campaign is a full integration of each of these potential components, be they TV, radio, out of home, earned media, all of these things, right? We put them together, we have some strategies, and then we look at these tactics, what is efficient, what utilizes our money best, and what is effective, what is actually going to create the change that we want to create. So challenge number 1, we need a campaign, but we need a campaign for each and every substance here. And this is one thing, we want to talk about impaired driving. In this room, we get impaired driving. But when we're talking about our audiences, alcohol impaired driving is a thing. Marijuana impaired driving is a thing. Prescription drug impaired driving is a thing. It's different audiences, it's different mindsets. We have to address these with different campaigns. I'm going to get into that a lot more in depth in the next slide. So how do we build a campaign? Well, that's challenge number 2. With alcohol, the hard work's already been done. In the 1980s, a number of groups came together and did the formative research necessary and planning necessary to build out that campaign. A lot of you in the room may have been a part of that. Frankly, for myself, I saw it happening on TV, but I was too young to be a part of that. And so regardless if you were a part of it or not, we all tend to forget it happened. We now live in a world where we have, here's impaired driving, here's the campaign, here's how we do it. And we have the fallacy of trying to push everything into that bucket where it doesn't work. And so we forget the step of actually campaign building that Jake was talking about. So what do we need? We need some research, we need some planning. Okay, what is research? Research is scientific tools, both quantitative like polling and qualitative like focus groups that we utilize to study populations. I want to underscore this. It's scientific. It comes out of actual science with actual evidence-based results. What is planning? So a planner takes all of those research that's available, as well as doing literature review, as well as everything else that they can find, subscription-based data, blah, 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 right? They put it in a bucket and they ask themselves, what is that emotional trigger that motivates that change? What's the insight? And once you have that insight, once you know how to program a person, you can persuade them to do what you want them to do. But if you don't have the insight, you can't move them. So why do we want to do this? It takes money and it takes time to do effective research and to do effective planning. But ultimately, when you know who to target and you know the most efficient means, those channels that actually work to target those audiences, and you know the messages that are actually going to persuade those audiences to act, you save money. You use less resources on your media buy. You use less resources with your PR agency pitching if you know what to sell and how to sell it. So, next challenge. What do we want? And I mean, you guys probably think I'm silly saying, what do we want? But do we want to create a large-scale societal change, or do we want to target high-risk drivers? And this is an important question, because the difference lies in what does the general public believe? What do they currently think, right? So let's go to the societal change side of the aisle. When we're talking about like traffic safety in general, do you think the public really thinks this is a pressing issue in the same way we do? Absolutely not. So Vision Zero's goal is to actually change that behavior. Let's look at speeding. Under 9, you're doing fine. None of us think normal speeding, and I want to use that term very deliberately here, is a problem. It's normal speeding, right? And so that's a societal change that needs to happen. And what about a marijuana impaired driving? And I'm going to toss prescription impaired driving here too. Do you think society sees that as a problem? Poll after poll after poll says they don't. They don't acknowledge the problem there whatsoever. That's a societal change issue. Let's jump to the other side of the aisle for some of those high-risk driver audiences that we're trying to target. Click it or ticket. Everyone knows you should wear a seatbelt. 10% of the public doesn't. We need a cluster analysis to go in and target those specific audiences and segment out who is not wearing a seatbelt, why are they not wearing a seatbelt, and how do we persuade them not to wear that seatbelt. Impaired driving, I'm going to discuss in the next slide. Speeding and aggressive driving. Here, I'm talking about that person doing 30 miles an hour above the speed limit, cutting in and out of traffic, that high-risk impaired or high-risk aggressive driver. We know they're out there. How do we target them, and how do we get them to stop their behavior? And then the final one, distracted driving. Everyone knows distracted driving is dangerous, and when you do survey after survey after survey, it's identified as the most dangerous thing you could do behind the wheel. Frankly, we know it's not the most dangerous thing you could do behind the wheel, even if we know it's dangerous. But people are still doing it. Everyone is still out there. And I want to use the term everyone because it's such an overwhelming problem. In my opinion, we need to actually focus on some addiction type messaging and some addiction type insights there, because I think that's how we move it. So ultimately, different goals, right? So are we trying to change perception of the public and create an awareness campaign? Or are we trying to actually do a behavior change campaign on those who are conducting the behavior? Which brings us to the next challenge. Impaired driving isn't a good category for messaging. It's just not. The audiences are fundamentally different of who is driving under the influence of alcohol versus marijuana versus prescription drugs versus other things. Totally different audiences. The mindsets are dramatically different amongst these audiences. A person who is driving behind the wheel after consuming alcohol, at the end of the day, is still scared of drunk drivers. If you're at a focus group with them, they are terrified of being out the road during the witching hour of those other drunk drivers out there, because I'm just buzzed, I'm not drunk, but the other drunk drivers are terrifying. They know it's a dangerous behavior. Versus marijuana impaired drivers, they absolutely positively do not think what they're doing is at all dangerous. They drive better under the influence of marijuana. Versus prescription drug drivers, where I'm going to talk in just a second here, they don't realize it's a problem because they're not sleepy. So audiences' mindset's different. The messages that work are fundamentally different. And the key insights on how to emotionally motivate those audiences are different. And here's the thing, with alcohol, we know. With all of the rest, we don't really know at this point. We have not done the formative research. With impaired driving, we know our audience. We're male, we're under the age of 35. Women are coming on and increasing in their percentage, but they still dramatically under-index. We know the key factors unmarried, that once you have kids, doesn't matter. If you get married, it matters a great deal. But if you get divorced, then you're gonna go back to your old behaviors. That's the key factor we found after analysis, poll after poll after poll, right? Marijuana, a lot of the assumptions we have are wrong. The assumption is college kids, hippie older stoners, because that's what we see. The truth is, it depends entirely on where you are. We did a study in Texas where it's still illegal, and we found that it skewed dramatically younger than alcohol impaired, but dramatically lower on socioeconomic status and on education. Will that change if legalization occurs in Texas? Probably. Will that change after the commercialization happens? Absolutely it will. This is something that is not static. You can't just do one poll in one state and come up or say the audience for marijuana is this. It is going to change as commercialization occurs. We are in a new industry that is unfolding, and we need to know our audiences are going to shift during that time period. What about prescription drugs? Well, we actually did a study here in Texas, and what we discovered was who's getting prescribed a drug doesn't necessarily correlate to who's driving under the influence. And from that study, we tested specifically benzos, opioids, and Ambien, and we came up with the insight that it was women, and it was middle-aged women, a lot of which had been prescribed this after they had their first child. And so they read the pill bottle, and they saw it may cause drowsiness. And so I'm not tired, so I'm safe to drive. That's the key insight, right? They had no clue that taking a benzo could actually impair them. It just could make them drowsy. And that's actually why Ambien was dramatically seen as dangerous by our audiences, because they know it's going to make me drowsy. It's pretty intuitive, right? And so let's get into some message testing, just really, really top level. The next challenge is this. What messages are actually going to work? So personally, I come at this from a political background. The first decade of my life, I worked in political messaging on campaigns. And so it's fundamentally different than those who come at it from the ad agency world, like Jake was talking about. For me, I look at it, and I also have my graduate degrees in social sciences. So I come at this from like I said, in politics, it's all about winning. It doesn't matter if you win Addies, it doesn't matter if you win Pollies, it matters if you win the race. And that's where I think we need to be, is looking at what actually achieves the change we want to achieve, and not just what's going to win some creative award out there somewhere. And so that's my philosophy. And so looking at the overarching brand, you can have a click it or ticket brand, that's great, but you're going to want to have narrow messages that target specific audiences. That's key, is making sure you're targeting the right audience with the right message. And so message testing, I absolutely believe we need polling, and we need really good scientific polling. We do not need just survey monkeys out to a list of friends and family. That's not what we need. We need people, and we don't need the kind of polling you see on the news, frankly. When they talk about like polling, and they talk about the polling errors and Gallup and this and that and the other, what they're looking at is a horse race. And a horse race really is pretty useless, in my opinion. We need to actually get in there and do a message battery with an initial ballot and then a final ballot, and then run the regression analysis to see what's changed that behavior and that mindset from the beginning to the final ballot. That's how we achieve actual true change-based behavior. And we can have multiple ballots. You could do an awareness ballot. You could do a ballot on change behavior. There's a lot of things you can do on that. So for multicultural audiences, we have to transcreate. You can't just translate materials. How do you best get the idea across? Not how do you take it from English and put it into Spanish? That is lazy and it's ineffective. You have to actually think of who your audience is and how they would communicate the idea. And finally, creative, test it through focus groups, and scientific focus groups, not just ad hoc. This isn't something where you call in the account executives and account coordinators to bring in their friends and family into a back room and you ask them questions and show them creative. If you have a scientific focus group with real facilitator guides, with real recruit that is balanced, then it doesn't matter. And a real moderator, if it's me, if it's a colleague of mine like Tessa or Susan, who is moderating the group, you're going to come up with the exact same results. It's repeatable by definition as being scientific. So the biggest takeaway on message is bad research is worse than no research at all. So very high level prescription drug example out of Texas. We've talked about the research, but what's the insight? The insight is that hook, right? And that's where planning comes into play. What's that emotional trigger that's going to make that audience care? For a prescription drug, we uncovered that a biggest fear that our target audience had is that mother either leaving her child an orphan or losing her child. And so how does that ad come together?
Prescription medication might be part of our daily routine, but when certain prescriptions are mixed with driving, the side effects may include delayed reaction, poor judgment, up to $17,000. Mixed with driving, the side effects may include delayed reaction, poor judgment, up to $17,000 in fines, jail time, and even loss of... When you drive drugged, the side effects
That's
hit
what
hard.
emotionally triggers
Plan
our audience, right?
while you can.
So let's get on to marijuana. So where are we with marijuana? Well, we have two audiences. We have the societal change audience, we have the high-risk
Prescription
audience. But the societal change audience, they do not know what to think. They do not know if it's dangerous, if it's not dangerous. They are highly malleable. We can influence their opinions today, and we need to start doing it. We need to tell them that this is a dangerous thing, that it is illegal, and we need to bridge that in, that the state is taking it seriously, which leads us to our high-risk audience. They will not believe that impaired driving after marijuana is dangerous, period. You cannot convince them of it. It will not happen. They are safer. They are better drivers. In their mind's eye, they will always believe this. And so they feel that if they are different, but in this case, different means better. And they also feel judged. They feel that people are gonna make them out to be a joke like Cheech and Chong, or they're going to go like reefer madness, that they're just crazy and insane and yada, yada, yada. And so all of this needs to go into framing how your creative comes out. And the message that works is law enforcement actually cares now. They're gonna randomly pull people over through maybe sobriety checkpoints. And so no matter how you drive, you're still in danger of being pulled over. And when they do, there are new technologies where they can detect if you've used marijuana. The plus side is this message also plays into a frame that a lot of people who use cannabis have of paranoia. And that paranoia frame is real and audience insight. And so again, if you're looking for keys on how to turn people, that's an important key. That's an important insight, that you need to make them realistically paranoid. So boom, this is the biggest, scariest challenge of all. Enforcement-based messaging today. Look at that image. That's an image we've run. That's an image we've used. Let me be crystal clear here. Enforcement-based messaging is the only scientifically confirmed way to message to alcohol and marijuana impaired driving high-risk audiences. It works. We know it works. We've tested it. We understand it works. Let me also be crystal clear here. The world has shifted, and law enforcement faces more challenges today to their image than they ever have before. There is an absolute deficit of trust today. Many people now view law enforcement in a negative light as hunters out to target and get minority communities. We don't like that that's the case, but that is the case. That is a reality. And how we as practitioners portray law enforcement can either make this better or make this worse. And I challenge us today that we have an obligation to make it better. So let's look at that image, right? You got the flashlight, you've got the big hat. We've used that image. It's a powerful image, right? Yeah, that's an image of a hunter. That's an image we cannot use ever again. That's an image that portrays this negative light. What about that iconic idea of pulling the person's head into the car to protect the head as they're getting into the vehicle? What about the idea of the knocking on the window? What about even a field sobriety test? All of those play into that submissive dominant, that you are submissive to that law enforcement officer. That's an image we can't use anymore. That's an image that is going to portray negatively those law enforcement officers. All of those images have to go. So how should we portray law enforcement officers? Caring, helping, loving, working with victims. We need to have diverse groups of officers shown as emotional human beings. I want to see them cry. I want to know why you're doing this, because we know in this room, all of us know why law enforcement chooses to do this. It's because they care. We need the public to know they care. We need to sell that image. Okay, so you're looking at me and saying, okay, so you say enforcement-based messaging works and you're taking away all of the fear. Heck no, fear works. It's just what's the idea of what's scary? Is it scary if you're looking in a rear view mirror and you see cherries and berries up there and you realize, oh crap, that's terrifying. The cherries and berries are enough. That's all you need. What about that moment where you're sitting in the back of a police cruiser? That's pretty terrifying too, and you're alone. And so let's see an ad on how we can actually make this happen.
This is the moment I should have planned for a designated driver, but didn't. And this is the moment I should have planned to call a cab, but didn't.
And this is the moment I should have just stopped.
And this is the moment that will stay with me forever.
Don't wait until it's too late. Plan while you can at soberrides.org. Drink, go drive, go to jail.
And so I'm sure that you guys may have some questions later on, but I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over.
I'm going to sit. I think that I'm ready to sit. So
We've done the
I told them all I
interrogate.
was going to get up, but I'm not going to. So I'm Shelly Baldwin. I am the director of the Washington Traffic Safety Commission. I learned how to be a director from the best. Thank you, Darren. And I've been in the position for 5 months. Prior to being the director, I was working in legislative and communications relations, and prior to that, I was the impaired driving program manager. So I come to talk about polysubstance use or multiple substance use from a deep background. And this chart here really talks a lot about some of the journey that I've been on. The red line, I think there's a pointer here, is there? Maybe not. The red line that's on the top, to the left-hand side of the chart, that is polysubstance use. So this is looking at drivers who are involved in impaired driving crashes and their drug results. So what do you notice about that line? About 2011, it was maybe at its lowest peak. And by the time we got to 2017, it had far outsized any other line on there. So the blue line underneath that, the one that says 67 on the left-hand side, that is alcohol only. So when I started, alcohol was really the biggest thing that was going on. In about 2009, we passed an all-offender ignition interlock law with compliance-based removal. And since that point, we can see that alcohol by itself has really decreased. The light blue line, that is drivers who only had one substance that wasn't alcohol, so one drug in their system. And that very bottom line, that is THC. So you can see in about 2012, Washington State legalized cannabis, and by 2014, we'd opened our first retail stores. So you can see it, THC by itself grew some, but it's still a small percentage of that overall what's going on in the world, right? So I'm looking at this polysubstance use line about 2017. I'm going, what is going on here? The most common combination in Washington was alcohol and marijuana together. Why is that? Why is it changing? I did not know. I couldn't imagine what was going on there. We did understand that most people who would drive after using marijuana felt like it was not a problem. I went to Hemp Fest one year and interviewed people, and I heard that loud and clear. It helps me zone out on the road, makes me a better driver. Not everybody said that. There were still people there at HempFest who told me, I would never drive after smoking. They just wouldn't. But I still didn't understand what was going on with this combination use. And so we had been working for a while with the Center for Health and Safety Culture. And at this point, we engaged them to help us understand that red line, what's going on. And we conducted really good scientific research on this topic, pre-groups, post-groups, really great research. And what did we find out? Well, one thing we found out is that Washington has a really good positive traffic safety culture. So sometimes we really focus on that minority of people who are doing the wrong thing and we want them to change. But it's also important to understand that 78% of people in Washington, representative sample, tell us they don't drive after drinking. They tell 85% of us don't drive after using cannabis. A lot of us don't use cannabis at all, but still you got to remember that the majority of people aren't doing this behavior. And 91% don't ever drive after using cannabis and alcohol together. But what about that other side, right? What about that 9% that are using cannabis and alcohol together? What do they think? Why are they doing this together? What we found was the majority of people who do it together believed that they could drink, and then when they were ready to leave and drive, they would use marijuana because it helped them sober up. Okay, when I was looking back at that one before, I would have never told you that that red line was about people trying to drive safe. But it was a very important realization for us. And we launched some really good, myth-busting type of pieces on that. We had the director of HempFest and our director at the time, Darren Grondell, sit down and talk about that myth. I mean, they just really kind of rolled out that it doesn't matter what you're impaired by, whatever substance you're on, it's not going to make you a better driver. Combining it with other things is not going to help. And that ad, because it featured somebody who was iconic in the marijuana world in Washington, really got a lot of play. It showed up in places where I would have not have thought to bought space. It showed up, it's still showing up in marijuana online magazines. The community loved it. We did some outside marijuana stores with Vivian McPeak, our HempFest director. And people who would come up to us outside these marijuana stores, he was like a celebrity. Like, I wouldn't have thought of him as a celebrity because I wasn't in that world, but he was amazing. And we handed out ride coupons as people were going into cannabis stores. We did a lot of really good pieces around that. One of the other things that I was super excited about in that survey was that most Washingtonians agree with us that the only acceptable number of deaths on our roadway is 0. So Washington was a Target Zero state back in 2000 when John Moffett, director at the time, said, I'm not going to set goals that tell me how many people I want to kill this year. Just not going to. It's morally wrong. So we've been a Target Zero state for a long time. We've done a lot of education around that. And to find that we were at the point already where 3/4 of the population were telling us, yeah, you're right. That's the only goal. So what did we do with all of this information? And one of the things that the Center for Health and Safety Culture has really been working on is this idea of proactive traffic safety culture. And so that's really talking about all of us, not that percentage of people that are doing the wrong thing, but it's talking about this 2/3 of the population who are telling us we shouldn't have deaths on our roadway. And it's moving us beyond compliance, right? So maybe I, keep my speed to less than 9 over when I'm on the freeway. I'm a good driver, right? I probably won't get a ticket. That's compliance, right? To a commitment to safety. And that's a different kind of conversation. That's a conversation that says, what can I do, me as an individual, what kind of impact can I have? We heard a lot about legislation and a lot about hesitance to move into stronger legislation. But what we know is most people want safe roads. So proactive traffic safety culture is this idea that we're going to engage with the majority of people who use our roads safely. We've identified them, we know they do, and help them reach a commitment to take safe actions that help us achieve that vision of 0 deaths on our roads. It's a different way to look at it than what we've been looking at it. So it's based on a theory out of the University of Montana Health and Safety Culture Center that works like this. Everybody has values. Those values are really hard to change. But we can kind of, we know what they are. People enjoy life, people enjoy their families, people want to contribute. I mean, there's a lot of good, healthy values that all of us share. And those values help form these attitudes and beliefs. So if I believe that everybody out there is driving high, what kind of actions am I going to take? If I'm looking at, am I willing to drive high? It's a little bit easier to be willing to drive high if I think all of my friends and all of my peers are driving high. And if that's a message I hear all the time, that's what I believe, I'm pretty willing to do that. And so what's going to happen to my behavior? I'm not going to improve my behavior, I'm going to make my behavior worse. And as we change the behavior, we change the traffic safety outcomes. So if what I actually believe is that there's just a very small minority of people who drive after using marijuana, am I going to be as willing to drive after using marijuana if I think my peers would disapprove of it? I'm not going to be as willing. And if I stop or I don't ever take that step to drive after marijuana, my behavior on the road is going to be better, and eventually we'll see traffic safety improving. So that's the groundwork, and I could talk about this forever, and I know we want to get to discussion, so I won't, but if you want to talk about this with me, I am more than happy to have that conversation. So we rolled all of this together into a new initiative. It's not just a campaign, it's not just a few minutes on the air. It's really how we're looking at how we are communicating in all of the things that we do, all of our projects, all of our programs, how we conduct outreach. And it's really not a Pollyanna thing saying, oh, everybody does the right thing. It's really more about balancing that concern that we have, that very legitimate people are dying on our roadways concern, with some hope. Not everyone's doing it. People want to take steps to stop it. We tap into those universal values. People want to live, people value their family, people want to reach out to their loved ones. We consider what positive actions people can take, as opposed to focusing on that negative one, I'm going to get arrested if I do this wrong thing. And we work to correct those misperceptions. So if I believe everybody's smoking marijuana on the roadway, that can have an impact, not just on myself, but on the people that I talk with, on the people that I work with, on the people I have conversations with in the doctor's office, all of the places where I'm at. So when I'm working on what we're actually doing campaign-wise, I'm thinking about who's my hero. I want my hero to be that person that you can identify with, that your sister can identify with, that your grandkids can identify with. And so we lovingly call this less scare, more care. So as we were doing our research around the Together We Get There campaign, we asked people in our focus groups to recall prior traffic safety PSAs that they had been exposed to. We didn't show them anything. We just asked them, have you seen one? What was it like? And then how did it make you feel? So this wheel right here is a feeling wheel. It gives them lots of different words to identify their emotions on. But you can see the base around the circle says fear, anger, I'm sorry, I can't remember that one. Surprise, joy, love. And when we ask people to think about commercials they've seen, so this is not necessarily target audience people, this is Washingtonians, we found that it was really anchored in kind of that fear and anger area. And what happens to your brain if you're not the target audience? We're not trying to scare you. You're our target audience of people we want to bring to our side. What happens if you're in that fear-based place? Your lizard brain takes over, and you're going to either fight the message or you're going to flee from the message. That message isn't true. That message doesn't apply to me. That's what happens in the fear-based level, right? When we introduced our concepts of the Together We Get There campaign, we found that we elicited joy and surprise. And that was really one of my big goals. And I'm out of time. I'm going to just play this for you. This is kind of our overarching, it worked yesterday. Can we make it work today? Looks like we're gonna go out. 30 seconds.
It's kind of magic when we put our phones out of reach or give extra room for someone on their bike. That little act of stopping to let someone cross the street, it's a thing of beauty. Even getting a ride home after drinking is quite heroic. Because it's all the little things that play a big role in keeping us safe. Together, we get there.
There it is today. Okay, thank you.
Amazing happens when you buckle a seatbelt. It's kind of magic when we put our phones out of reach or give extra room for someone on their bike. That little act of stopping to let someone cross the street, it's a thing of beauty. Even getting a ride home after drinking is quite heroic. Because it's all the little things that play a big role in keeping us safe. Together, we get there.
So the focus was really all the actions that you can take as an individual that'll help us build this community that wants to keep our roads safe. And in Washington, we did it for recycling. We're mad recyclers. When I go someplace and it doesn't have a recycling bin, I carry my plastic bottle home. So nobody sees me recycle, and I still feel really good about doing that. And that is really where we want to push the conversation in Washington. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. I love the less scare, more care so much. Can I just get a time check? Because I know we were a little behind. Are we okay to run over a little bit? Yeah. You sure? Okay, just a little bit. Okay, so I think, thank you, Darren. Okay. All right, so I think we heard a number of different things today. We heard less scare, more care. But then, David, you also talked about how your campaign was very scare-based.
Absolutely.
So I think the thread that leads through both of those is emotion. Mm-hmm. And so I told you guys that I was going to ask at the end what your favorite campaign is. So I'll start with you, David. Tell me what your favorite campaign is. Doesn't have to be traffic safety related. Okay, so favorite public information education campaign for me is Don't Mess with Texas. It's iconic. It's one of those campaigns that you see it, you personify what does it mean to be a Texan. It means I'm proud of my state. I want to keep it clean. I want to keep it litter off the roads. And yeah, it's one of those campaigns to me that really just resonates and gets to the heart. And at this point now, it's a mantra. It's don't mess with Texan. If you talk with a Texan, they are going to say that, and it's a way of life. We've done our agency has the campaign currently. We're the stewards of that campaign. We've done some national research, and it's got about 70% national recall, which is phenomenal for a campaign that just ran in Texas. And people get that it's a state pride issue, and why it's a state pride is the litter. So that's me.
Yeah, awesome. And that's a really good example of culture, right? Yeah. So in Texas, we identify with this piece.
Yes.
And that's how culture change happens. Eventually, it's a longer, slower method. I'm going to say there's an ad out of England that I bet most of people in this room have seen it, and it's a family. They're sitting in their living room. The father is facing a couch and a chair, and there's a coffee table between him and his wife and his daughter. And he's driving, he's pantomiming driving. And, then he's pantomiming that he's going to crash, and the glitter comes up off the coffee table, and it's flying all over the place, big concern. And what we see is his wife and his daughter come, and they wrap their arms around him like a seatbelt.
Oh, yeah.
One does the stomach, and the other comes across the top, and it says choose life.
That's a good one. I forgot about
that.
that
one.
It just, there's this emotional pull, there's the right message, there's the positive part of it, instead of just leaving everybody with the crash and the blood in the guts. So I love that one.
Good pick. So I normally, and I have a longer version of this presentation, I normally show my favorite ad. So for those of you who don't know me, I have twin girls who are 10, so I'm a girl dad. And Always did, which is like a feminine products company, did an ad like a girl campaign.
Oh yeah.
And that campaign not only is like pulls on the emotional heartstrings, it's about self-esteem in young girls, and their target audience are young men. And their campaign was effective at getting, this is by self-report, so their target audience of young men, a 33% increase in those who committed to not using like a girl as in a negative way, like a negative, you throw like a girl, you run like a girl, that would only be used as a positive message or not at all. So that was mine.
I love that campaign.
That's great.
Love it. And I asked that question because I think traffic safety can sometimes be a echo chamber.
Yeah.
So I think our goal, especially for NACIT, is to widen that audience, and how do we motivate others to do that? So we can open the floor for other questions if folks have them, but I think that's our challenge.
I have to commend the work that you guys, I don't see that often across the states, so I'm super impressed.
Absolutely.
We need our clubs to
That
do
was
that.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Idaho and Utah are both doing some very similar culture
glad to hear
pieces.
I saw you first, Sam, and then I'll go Bill. Okay, Sam, hit it. You're raising, are you asking a question? Oh, go for it.
As a comms fella, this was fascinating, and I would love to nerd out with you guys about all of the data that you share. But just a question, when you were talking about the perception of people who said, I think it's fine to smoke cannabis and drive, or I would never do that, was there any delineation between smoking it and having an edible in that perception?
No, not for me. It's any kind of consumption whatsoever. They felt that they were better drivers. And what's interesting when you hit on that, if I'm drinking alcohol, I need to sober up. What do? I do something that makes me a better driver. I smoke weed, or I take an edible. I mean, it makes so much logical sense when you said that. It hadn't clued in, and I'm like, well, duh, that's why polyuse happens, because people want to be a better driver, so they get high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
have
I
a
think
question back here.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ride-sharing companies like Uber and Lyft provide an enormous benefit in this regard to help reduce traffic fatalities and maimings. They unfortunately have been opposed in various cities like New York City and Austin because they threaten the livelihood of taxi cab drivers. Is it an effective message generally that Uber, Lyft, and similar companies are in fact saving lives, and how best can that message be conveyed to the public?
Well, that's great. Responsibility.org and Governor's Highway Safety Association have actually allowed states the chance at grants to work with Lyft during their campaigns, their high visibility campaigns. And we've done that, I think, really, really, really well. People are very receptive to it. I think during those campaigns, we were really about planning ahead, and plan before you party is the tagline that we used. And matching that with, like I was talking about, being at the marijuana stores and handing out these Lyft ride coupons was a great interaction and a great way to have a conversation about, making that plan beforehand and making sure you have that safe ride. So I think they're great.
Yeah, I would support the point about planning ahead, because one of the reasons why people will not use Uber or Lyft after they've driven somewhere is because they don't want to leave their car, and they don't want it to get towed, and they don't want to have to figure out how to get back. So planning ahead, I think, is the way to fully leverage the benefits of companies like Uber and Lyft.
Bill.
Very interesting, thank you. I've heard care and I've heard scare. Years ago, I think it was Bill Burkhart from the Washington State Patrol, Bill somebody. You guys had some terrific commercials, and I haven't heard anybody talk about this, about humor. So I'm wondering what you're not to take away from the seriousness of the subject matter, but in trying to penetrate that target audience, what your thoughts are about that. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and jump on the humor bandwagon. In terms of, again, we circle back to what is your goal, right? So if your goal is societal change, which you were talking about, you can escape the fear realm, right? And so when you get in there, I think that South Dakota, I was talking about this last night, did a really fantastic job with the Jim Reaper campaign. And that was based entirely on humor. It's a fantastic way of getting the general public to see traffic safety. And so I think that was an effective campaign. I think humor is a great way of getting to that segment, the general public. I would have much more apprehension of trying to get to your high-risk driver audience with it. I don't think it's effective there, and I would not use it for marijuana for your high-risk audience. I mean, the Cheech and Chong risk is so super duper real that anything that seems like you're making fun of marijuana users is going to fail spectacularly.
Yeah.
I've seen that in groups.
So you've identified something that I think is important, and this is a good opportunity to hit on it, is so we develop these campaigns and we run them for the general population, but you have to remember that they're designed for a target audience. Mm-hmm. And so even if they're mass media campaigns and everybody's receiving the message, when you're evaluating the effect of that campaign, you want to evaluate it among members of that target audience. Because if you try to measure it among the general public, you're sort of like nullifying the result, the impact that you could have otherwise measured. So if you're developing a message for a specific target audience for whom fear is effective, then you don't want to measure the effect of that campaign among the general public. You want to measure it just for that audience that the message was developed for. And that is not often done with these campaigns.
I think humor too can have its place and can be really fun. Idaho's been using Not on My Sasquatch, which is brilliant and really fun. I think humor can be very detrimental if you're making fun of somebody.
Yeah.
And I would never want to do that. I think that the worst thing we can do is further stigmatize people.
And alienate them.
And alienate them, especially if we're talking about addiction. So if I'm already having trouble and now I feel like everybody hates me, how likely am I going to be to reach out for the help that I need?
And
So
I also want
just
to
a cautionary
underline
note.
for another audience that I think we sometimes forget about to our detriment, victims. And humor and making light of someone's victimhood is an offense. I mean, I'm going to say that it is a flat out offense. And so I think, obviously South Dakota did it properly, they did it right. But if your humor is done in a way to where a victim gets re-victimized by it, it's not right.
Yeah, and I would add that from Erin Holmes, what she taught me from this population was shame for women. So I feel like that needs to be added into there as well.
Another trigger for women that's super interesting that we actually ran a campaign on is vanity.
Yes.
And I think, way predating my time in Texas, they had the Jackie Sabadino campaign and that. So the idea for women of losing your appearance, of losing your looks is a very effective trigger. You look at all of the beauty ads that are out in today's world, they're out there for a reason, they're effective. And so that's a trigger that actually really works on the female audiences.
I think we have time for one more. Okay, yep.
Hi, thank you all so much. I'm Stephanie Manning, the Chief Government Affairs Officer for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And I've only been able to attend part of this because we're working on the Ride and Halt Act, and I've been up in my hotel room most of the time, so I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to talk with more of you, but there's some exciting stuff hopefully happening next week in the Senate. I want to just speak to the issue of equity and enforcement, because this is something that MAD is working very hard on, and I'm really excited to talk with Chief Sharp and others at IACP tonight and tomorrow about this issue as well. We've been pushing, victims and survivors have been pushing very hard on this administration to do both, to focus on enforcement that we know works, that does not have inequities, and that is hazardous driving behavior. The data is pretty clear. The data that we do have, it's all we have at this point, right? We can't, let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The 2020 preliminary numbers came out. We're moving very much in the wrong direction. We now have to serve more victims and survivors, and we can't wait to fully understand how to move forward on equity. We cannot stop enforcement at the expense of, we're going to go above 40,000 again pretty soon if we keep moving in this direction for the first time in, well over a decade. So from the victim survivor perspective, and I'm lucky enough not to be one, but I speak for them. I represent millions of them. So I guess I just want to make the point that there was no April distraction event, kickoff event with the administration. There was nobody in the administration standing next to law enforcement. They were not allowed to. They were not allowed to do a click it or ticket event. And after that happened, we called and said, if you do this for drive sober, get pulled over, if you pull back on DWI enforcement, which by the way, DWI enforcement is not the problem. It's hazardous driving behavior that is not the problem. When cops enforce for speed and drunk driving or impairment, the inequities essentially go away. It's other issues where we see the inequities in the data. We've got to do a really good job, and this is a tough issue, very sensitive on all sides. MAD wants to try to build bridges and differentiate between the types of enforcement. We're going to partner with NHTSA on 10 regional law enforcement summits that focus on equity and enforcement and best practices on DWI. All impairment, really, it's all the same when you really talk about enforcement for impairment in many ways. So I raise this, that we also just heard from the administration, and then I'll stop. But I wanted everybody to be aware of what's coming up. August 17th, the administration for the first time is going to stand up with us and do the national kickoff for Drive Sober, Get Pulled Over. It's a test case. They're nervous about it. The Buttigieg folks are nervous. They're working with people of color, victims who are people of color from MAD and others, and GHSA will be there as well, a trauma surgeon, et cetera, who's going to talk about equity and enforcement and how there are best practices and how hazardous driving behavior, we're going to say this, I can't tell you what the administration is going to say, but they know what we're going to say. We're also going to focus on equity. In addition to equity, we're going to focus on technology and the equity piece. How what we're working on Halt and Ride, which hopefully will pass before this event, we're hoping that we see this movement next week in time for August 17th, so we can say to these practices, technology is the future. Technology knows no color, no race. So anyway, I just wanted to let you all know what MAD is actively engaged on, both on Capitol Hill and with the administration. Victims are raising these issues very loudly, and we're going to get louder because we know that you all, the officers, who I'm looking at some of you, are the front lines. Officers are our heroes. Victims and law enforcement have worked together 42 years since MAD was around. So we understand the need for reform. We understand the inequities, but we cannot let traffic safety enforcement die. We just can't. So I just wanted to let you all know that we're really active on this, and I look forward to talks with IACP this weekend. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you. Thank you all very much. I'm just seeing the big zero sign, so thank you all very much for your time on this. I think we learned a lot, and I'm sure we can continue the discussion after the break. So thank you.
All right.